She invited everyone to that dinner, her coworkers, her clients, her college friends she hadn't seen in years. The only person she made sure to keep out was the woman who had been quietly funding the whole thing for the past 4 years. I know because I was that woman. And I was sitting in a bank office with a pen in my hand, about to sign over $160,000 to buy them a house, when her husband sent me that text.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I want you to picture something. You're sitting in a gray chair across from a bank officer named Gerald. Gerald has a kind face, the kind of man who double-checks his work before he hands anything over. The room smells like printer toner and carpet cleaner. There's a little dish of hard candies on his desk that he's never once offered you, but you've been coming here long enough that you've stopped noticing. On the desk in front of you is a wire transfer authorization form. The amount at the top reads $160,000. That number is your whole life, not a figure, not an investment. Your life, 31 years of showing up, staying late, eating lunch at your desk, driving a car that was paid off 12 years ago so you wouldn't have a car note. 31 years of a school administrator's salary plus weekend bookkeeping work, plus whatever you could clip and save and not spend on yourself. All of it reduced to one number on a form in Gerald's clean, well-lit office. You pick up the pen, and your phone buzzes. I almost didn't look at it. I almost signed first and looked after, the way you do when you're in the middle of something important and you trust that whatever's on your phone can wait. But something made me stop. Some little instinct I couldn't name at the time. The text was from my son, Marcus. Mom, Cass's birthday dinner is Saturday. She'd prefer you not come. It's a work crowd. You know how you can be. I read it once, then I read it again. Then I set the phone face down on Gerald's desk, very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady and you don't want anyone to see that. You know how you can be. I had been sitting in that chair about to hand over every dollar I had saved since 1993 to buy my son and his wife a condominium in Lincoln Park, a 3-bedroom on the 14th floor with a parking space and a view of the lake. The kind of place I would never buy for myself, had never once considered buying for myself, because that kind of money felt like security, the thing you hold on to until you need it for something that truly matters. And I had decided that my son mattered, that his future mattered, that helping him own something solid was worth every sacrifice I had made to save it. That was the moment the pen stopped moving. Frar. I told Gerald I needed to make a quick call and stepped into the little alcove by the water fountain where people go to pretend they have privacy. Marcus picked up on the second ring, cheerful, not a trace of anything in his voice. Hey, Mom, did you get a chance to look at the parking addendum Gerald sent over? They want to make sure the space assignment is in writing before the wire goes through. I stood there for a second. I got your text, I said. Oh. A beat. Yeah, I wanted to give you enough notice so you didn't have to rearrange your weekend or anything. I see. It's not a big deal, Mom. It's just, Cass has a lot of work people coming, you know? Her clients, some people from her firm. It's a certain kind of crowd and she wants everything to flow. You know how you can be sometimes in group settings. You get a little... He stopped, chose a different word. Overwhelming. That word. I had driven 2 hours in the rain to sit in the emergency room with that boy when he broke his arm in 8th grade. I had learned QuickBooks at the age of 54 so I could run my bookkeeping practice and pay off his student loans without telling him that was what the money was for. I had worn the same winter coat for 9 years. Overwhelming. I understand, baby, I said. My voice sounded completely normal. That surprised me. Great, he said, relieved. So we're good? Because Gerald's probably waiting. We're fine. Go ahead. I hung up and stood in the alcove for a moment. There was a small, dark window in the wall across from me. One of those decorative frosted glass inserts that don't actually look out anywhere. But if you stood close enough, You could just barely see your own reflection. I looked at myself for a long time. 62 years old. Reading glasses pushed up on my head. Wearing the good blazer I put on whenever I come to the bank because it makes me feel like someone who belongs in a room like this. Raymond used to say I always looked like I was running a meeting even when I was just going to the grocery store. Standing there, looking at my own reflection, I felt something I didn't have a word for yet. It wasn't sadness. It was something older than sadness. Something that had been building for a long time and had simply chosen this moment to become undeniable. Soccer. I walked back to Gerald's desk. He looked up from his keyboard with that mild, professional smile. Everything okay? I'd like to cancel the transfer. He blinked. I'm sorry. The wire. I'd like to cancel it. He set his pen down. Mrs. Chambers, the authorization has already been initiated. The seller's attorney is expecting confirmation by end of business today. There may be fees associated with... Gerald. I said his name quietly, and he stopped. Cancel the transfer, please. He looked at me for a moment, not unkindly, just trying to read the situation. Then he nodded and turned to his keyboard. I didn't give him an explanation. I didn't have one I could put into words yet. I only knew that something had shifted in me as permanently as a bone moving in its socket, and I was not signing that form today. He printed a cancellation confirmation and slid it across the desk. I folded it into my purse. Is there anything else I can help you with today? He asked. No, thank you, Gerald. I drove home on the expressway with the radio off. The lake was out to my left, flat and gray in the October light. I kept both hands on the wheel. I didn't cry. I noticed that about myself. I kept waiting for the tears and they didn't come. What came instead was something quieter and more focused, a kind of reckoning that had no shape yet, but felt real in the way that matters. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for about 10 minutes. Then I went inside and made a pot of coffee. You need to understand who I am before I tell you what happened next. Not because I want credit, because without it, what I did might not make sense. My husband Raymond died in October of 2001. Marcus was 11. We had been married for 14 years, and I had never once made a major decision without talking to Raymond first. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't have to. We were partners in the actual meaning of that word. When he was gone, I had a mortgage, a car that needed new brakes, and a child who cried every night for 4 months, and then one day simply stopped and never mentioned his father again in a way that broke my heart differently, but just as completely. I did not fall apart. I want to be clear about that. I had my moments. I had mornings when getting out of bed required a conscious act of will that took everything I had. But I got up. I went to work. I sat at my kitchen table on Sunday evenings and made sure the numbers added up. I was an administrator for Chicago Public Schools for 26 years. I retired at 58 and started a bookkeeping practice out of my spare bedroom because I wasn't ready to sit still. I have 6 clients, a reliable reputation, and a waiting list that is small but real. I paid off my house in 2015. I drove the same car for 11 years. I took one vacation, a 5-day trip to New Orleans, with my friend Denise, and considered it a luxury I had earned. Marcus never knew how close the margins were when he was in high school. I made sure of that. I wanted him to grow up knowing there was enough, because I believed a child who feels financially safe becomes an adult who is not afraid. I thought that was a gift. What I didn't understand until much later is that a child who grows up never seeing the cost of things can also become an adult who doesn't calculate it. He got his degree in business administration from DePaul. He landed a project management job at a mid-sized real estate development firm. He met Cassandra Preston at a work event when he was 31, married her 2 years later, and somewhere in that transition, my son, the boy I raised, started becoming someone I had to work to recognize. It happened gradually, the way most things do. The visits got shorter. The calls got more purposeful. Checking in, not quite the same as catching up. I told myself it was normal. That this was what happened when your child built a life. That I should be grateful. I was grateful. I just didn't understand yet that gratitude and blindness are not the same thing, though I had been treating them like they were. Marcus called 4 times the evening I canceled the transfer, then twice the next morning, then once more around noon, a long pause on the voicemail where it sounded like he started to say something and thought better of it. I let them all go. I was not ignoring him out of cruelty. I was ignoring him because I needed to think, and I have never been able to think clearly while someone else is talking. Raymond always said that about me. Lorraine processes in silence. Give her room. By the 3rd day, Denise showed up. Denise and I have been neighbors for 18 years. She is the kind of woman who appears at your door with food when something is wrong, who has never once made me feel like a burden for accepting it, and who will tell you the truth even when it costs her the conversation. She stood in my doorway holding a container of her chicken and rice and took one look at my kitchen table. The unopened mail, the cold coffee cup, the fact that I hadn't moved the Sunday paper from where I dropped it 3 days ago, and walked herself in without being asked. I told her about the text, about the call, about walking back to Gerald's desk and asking him to cancel it. I didn't tell her about the fraud. I didn't know about that yet. Denise sat across from me with her hands folded on the table like she was in church. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long?" "How long what? How long has she been keeping you out of things?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. When I actually thought about it, really thought about it, the way I hadn't let myself before, the list was longer than I expected. The housewarming dinner for their first apartment that I found out about after the fact. The Christmas gathering 2 years ago, where I'd been told it was just the 2 of them, but then saw photos on Cassandra's page with 8 people sitting around a table. The birthday dinner Marcus threw for himself last April, where I got a call the morning of and the reservation was at 7, and by the time I dressed and drove downtown, they were already on dessert. Small things, easily explained individually, impossible to explain collectively. "Baby," Denise said, "you should have let that wire bounce on its own." I almost laughed. "I still might have to," I said. She reached across and covered my hand with hers. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I told her, "but I'm going to be still and let the answer come." 10 days after I canceled the transfer, my phone rang and Gerald's direct number came up on the screen. I assumed it was about fees, a penalty for pulling the authorization, some paperwork I needed to sign to formally close out the transaction. I called him back from my car in the parking lot of the Jewel Osco on 87th and told him I had a few minutes if he wanted to talk. He asked if I could come in. His tone was careful in a way that I noticed but didn't understand. The next morning, I sat in that same gray chair and this time Gerald was not alone. There was a woman beside him, composed, professional, maybe 40, who introduced herself as Patricia Okafor from the bank's Fraud and Compliance Division. I looked at Gerald. "Standard procedure," he said. "When a large transfer is canceled, the system flags the account for a routine review. In your case, the review turned up something we felt obligated to share with you directly." Patricia slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed bank statements going back almost 4 years. Each page had several line items highlighted in yellow. Small recurring transfers. $1,800, sometimes $2,000, sometimes $1,950. Going out every 28 to 31 days like clockwork. I looked at the highlighted lines. "I didn't authorize these," I said. "We know," Patricia said. Her voice was steady and not unkind. Each transaction was accompanied by a signed authorization form bearing your signature. Our handwriting analysts have reviewed the signatures and identified them as inconsistent with your verified signature on file. The variations are subtle but systematic. These are forgeries. The word sat in the room like something dropped. Forgeries. I looked at the statements again. 4 years, nearly 4 years, of steady, quiet withdrawals from my account, each small enough not to trigger automatic fraud alerts, each time just far enough apart not to create a pattern the system would catch immediately. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Whoever did this had been patient. Where did the money go? I asked. Patricia turned to the next page in the folder. The account was registered to a business called Preston and Cass Design Group. I didn't recognize the name right away. I sat there turning it over, trying to place it, and for a few seconds, I genuinely couldn't. Then Patricia said, "The account was opened 4 years and 2 months ago. The registered owner is a Cassandra M. Preston Chambers." There it was. Preston was Cassandra's maiden name, the name she still used professionally, the name on the Instagram page for her interior design firm that I had looked at exactly once and then stopped looking at because it made me feel something I didn't want to examine. Preston and Cass Design Group. The boutique firm Cassandra was always talking about building from the ground up. The one she described at dinners with quiet pride. I started with nothing, just my vision and my laptop and a few good contacts. The one Marcus backed her up on every time, nodding like a man who believed every word. Total withdrawn, $94,320. I looked at the number for a long time. Gerald said, "Mrs. Chambers, bank policy requires us to report suspected fraud to law enforcement within 48 hours of identification. Given the circumstances, given that this involves a family member, I wanted to speak with you first." "You're giving me time," I said. "I'm giving you 48 hours. I nodded. I thanked him. I thanked Patricia. I stood up, shook both their hands, picked up the folder, and walked out of the bank into a gray November morning that felt completely different from every other gray November morning I had ever walked into. $94,000. 4 years. My signature, forged and copied and used like a tool over and over, while Marcus sat across from me at dinners and talked about Cassandra's business like it was something she had built herself. She had, in a sense. She had built it. With my money. I drove to the lakefront. I don't know why I went there exactly. I wasn't thinking clearly about destinations. I just knew I needed water, an open space, and the absence of walls. I parked near the museum campus and walked down to a bench facing the lake. It was cold. I didn't have a hat. I sat there anyway. The water was that particular November shade of dark gray-green that looks more like the ocean than a lake. A few joggers went by. A man was walking a dog the size of a small horse. The city hummed behind me. I sat with the folder on my lap, and I thought about a specific Tuesday afternoon when Marcus was 16. He had come home from school to find me at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of me. The mortgage statement, the utilities, the car insurance, the past due notice on the water bill I'd been holding off on because the orthodontist payment had come in the same week. I was doing the math out loud the way I always did, moving numbers around like puzzle pieces, finding the version where everything fit. Marcus put his backpack down and stood behind me and watched for a minute. Then he said, "Mom, when I make it, you won't have to do that anymore." I had turned around and looked at him, this serious 16-year-old with his father's eyes, and I had felt something so large and warm in my chest I couldn't contain it. "You don't have to wait until you make it," I told him. "You just have to be a good man. That's enough for me." He nodded like he was filing it away, like he was going to hold on to that. I believed him so completely. I sat on that bench until my hands went cold and I couldn't avoid it anymore. Then I opened the folder and looked at the statements again. 4 years. He had watched me for 4 years, not the way a son watches his mother, the way a person watches a resource. I closed the folder. I wasn't going to cry here. I would let myself cry later, privately, in the way I do most of the hard things, alone and on my own schedule. Right now, I needed to think. Ooh. I called Denise from the parking lot and asked if she was home. She said, "I'm home and I have leftover sweet potato pie, and whatever you need to tell me, you should come tell me in person." I drove straight there. She opened the door before I knocked, which meant she had been watching from my car, which meant she already understood this was serious. She let me sit at her kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink and a slice of pie I didn't touch while I told her everything: the forgeries, the transfers, the business account, the name. Denise didn't say anything for a long time after I finished. She just sat there with her hands wrapped around her own mug, looking at a point somewhere past my shoulder. Then she said, 4 years. Yes. $94,000. $94,320. And he was going to let you wire him another $160,000 on top of it. When she said it out loud like that, in that plain flat sequence, something landed in my chest that hadn't fully landed yet. I pressed my lips together. "Lorraine." Her voice dropped, got real. "I need you to hear what I'm saying. This was not a mistake. This was not a moment of weakness. This was a plan. This was something they built together. You understand that?" I nodded. "What do you want to do?" I had been sitting with that question since I left the bank. I had turned it over the whole drive to the lakefront and the whole drive back. And somewhere in the quiet of that bench by the water, with the wind coming off the lake and the folder on my lap, I'd come to a conclusion that surprised me with how calm it felt. "I'm not going to the police," I said. "Not yet." Denise raised an eyebrow. "I want them to see me first," I said. "I want them to sit across from me and look at my face and understand what they did and who they did it to, before anyone else gets involved, before it becomes something public and legal and out of my hands." I paused. "And then I want to decide what happens next. Not them, me." Denise was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, but you're going to need someone in your corner who knows how this works." "I know," I said. "That's what I was going to ask you about." Denise made 2 calls. By Thursday evening, I was sitting in the office of Calvin Webb on the 14th floor of a building on South Michigan, watching him read through the folder Patricia Okafor had given me. He was 57, maybe 58, slight, deliberate, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck that he put on without ceremony. Denise had known him for years through their church. He was on the building committee, and she said he was the kind of man who read every line of a contract before he signed anything. He read the entire folder. I waited. When he finished, he took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "The forgeries are documentable," he said. "The transfers are clearly traced. The business account is registered in her name and funded exclusively by these withdrawals. If this went to a criminal court, you'd be looking at forgery, fraud, and theft, all felonies, all with a paper trail that a first-year prosecutor could follow. And civil? Civil gives you recovery options. You can pursue the $94,000 directly, plus damages. You can also pursue a claim against the business assets since the business was funded with stolen capital." He paused. "But you said you don't want to go that route." "I said I don't want to go there first." He nodded slowly. "A structured private resolution. You present them with their options. They choose compliance or prosecution. In exchange for their compliance, you receive restitution, potentially business assets, and their silence. Is that legal? If done correctly, yes. You are not extorting them. You're offering them an alternative to criminal prosecution that includes accountability and restitution. The distinction matters, and we'll be precise about it." He looked at me over his glasses. "You understand this requires nerve." "I understand. And if they call your bluff?" "It won't be a bluff." He studied me for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. "All right," he said. Let's talk about what we're going to draft. I gave myself 1 week. I told Calvin I wanted to understand exactly what I was dealing with before we put anything on paper. He said that was smart. So I spent 7 days learning everything I could about Preston and Cast Design Group. Their website was polished. Clean lines, a muted palette, portfolio photos of high-end residential work, kitchens with Calacatta marble counters, living rooms with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a rooftop terrace in Streeterville with custom teak furniture and built-in planters, the kind of spaces that appear in lifestyle magazines between articles about how to simplify your life while spending $40,000 on a kitchen renovation. Cassandra's bio described her as a self-taught designer who built her practice through referrals and word of mouth, starting with a single client and growing the firm over 4 years to its current portfolio. I read that paragraph 3 times. Their social media showed a different kind of picture. Cassandra, at industry events, at a ribbon cutting for a showroom partnership, at a charity auction for a design foundation. Marcus appeared in a few photos, always at the edge of the frame, always with that particular smile he used in public settings that I recognized as his performance smile rather than his real one. On the 4th day, I drove to Wicker Park. I told myself I was just going to look at the outside of the building. I was not going to go in. I was going to drive past, get a sense of the space, and leave. But the parking was easy and the door was open, and I walked in before I'd fully decided to. A young woman at the reception desk looked up and smiled. She had on a headset and a plant on her desk that she was clearly very attentive to, based on how green it looked. I told her I was considering a redesign of my home office and had heard good things about the firm. She was warm and helpful. She walked me through their consultation process while I looked around. The office was genuinely beautiful. I'll give Cassandra that. The space itself had real taste. Warm lighting, interesting materials, the kind of considered details that you can't fake. On the far wall, there was a framed photograph, an 8x10 in a simple black frame. Cassandra, at what appeared to be some kind of opening event. Wine glasses in the background, someone cutting a ribbon. She was smiling the way people smile when something they worked for is finally real. Marcus was standing beside her. His hand was on her back. He was smiling too. I took out my phone like I was checking a message. I held it up and photographed the wall, the whole wall, casually, the way people do when they like the way a room looks. Then I thanked the receptionist, took a business card, and walked out. I sat in my car for a moment. The firm was real. The work was real. The clients were real. And all of it, the lease, the equipment, the early contracts, the momentum that gets a business to the point where it can sustain itself, all of it had started with my money. I drove home and called Calvin. What? Calvin spent 2 weeks on the paperwork. I reviewed every draft, asked questions about every clause, and by the time we were finished, I understood each document as well as he did. The first was a fraud affidavit, a detailed factual account of the forgeries, the transfers, the amounts, the timeline, and the destination account. Signed by me, notarized, ready to attach to a criminal complaint. The second was a written acknowledgement of complicity for Cassandra, a statement confirming that she had received funds from my account into her business, had been informed of the source, and had continued to accept those funds. Calvin explained that this was the document most likely to cause resistance. She's going to claim she didn't know, he said. They usually do. I told him that was fine. I wasn't relying on her cooperation to establish the facts. The third document was a business transfer agreement. Full ownership of Preston and Cast Design Group, transferred to me immediately upon signing, in lieu of criminal prosecution. I signed my name at the bottom of the fraud affidavit and set the pen down. These are ready, Calvin said. Not yet, I said. I need them to come to me. I had not spoken to Marcus in 3 weeks, His calls had slowed from daily to every other day to a text every few days that said some version of just checking on you, Mom, as if we'd had a misunderstanding about a recipe instead of me canceling a $160,000 wire on the day his wife texted me out of her own birthday dinner. I picked up the phone on a Wednesday evening. Marcus answered on the first ring. Mom. The relief in his voice was immediate, involuntary, real. I've been worried about you. I know, I said. I've been doing some thinking. Of course. Yeah. I completely understand. I think I may have overreacted, I said. About the dinner, about the transfer. I've been sitting with it, and I think I let my feelings get the better of me. A pause. Then, no, Mom. I get it. The timing was bad. We should have handled it differently. I'd like to see you and Cassandra, I said. In person. Talk things through. Maybe start fresh. The relief on his end was audible. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you want, we can come to you. Actually, I said, I was thinking somewhere neutral. Embers, maybe. The place on Randolph. I've always liked it there. A brief silence. He was doing the math, realizing I had chosen a restaurant that required him to come to me. On ground I had selected. That's perfect, he said. Cassandra will love that. Saturday? Saturday, I said. 7 o'clock. When I hung up, I sat for a moment in the quiet of my living room. The invitation had been accepted. They were coming to the table. And they believed, both of them, I was certain, that they were coming to collect. I arrived at 20 minutes to 7. The hostess led me to the table I had reserved, a corner booth in the back of the room, away from the bar noise, with a clear sightline to the entrance. I had requested this specifically. I ordered sparkling water and sat with my hands folded on the table. I was wearing a deep burgundy wrap dress, one of 2 nice dresses I own. The pearl earrings Raymond gave me on our 10th anniversary, which I almost never wear because they feel like a special occasion, and I almost never allow myself special occasions. I had put on a lipstick that Denise had given me last Christmas and told me I never wore, which was true, and which I had decided was going to change. I was not dressing for them. I want to be precise about that. I was dressing for myself, for the version of me I was going to need to be in the next 2 hours. At 7:02, Marcus and Cassandra came through the door. I watched them before they saw me. Marcus was scanning the room with that slightly anxious expression he's had since he was small, always checking the temperature of a situation before entering it. Cassandra was different. She moved through the room like she expected it to accommodate her, which in fairness it generally did. She was wearing fitted black pants and a cream blouse and small diamond earrings that caught the light. I knew when she bought those earrings, not the specific date. I didn't have receipts, but I knew the timeline. I knew what year the withdrawal started, and I knew what year Cassandra's public presence changed. When the professional photos improved, when the wardrobe shifted, when the office moved from a shared co-working space to its own address in Wicker Park. I had watched all of it happen in real time and thought it was success. Mom. Marcus hugged me. Genuinely, I think. There was something real in it, which made it harder in some ways. Cassandra hugged me too, lighter, performed, her hand barely grazing my shoulder. You look wonderful, she said. Thank you. So do you. We sat down. The first 20 minutes were careful. Weather, the restaurant's menu, a mild complaint from Cassandra about traffic on the drive over. Marcus asked about my bookkeeping clients, which he has never once asked about before in my memory, and I answered pleasantly and watched him nod like he was listening. They apologized for the dinner text. Cassandra took responsibility, briefly, efficiently, with the practiced ease of someone who has learned that a well-timed apology closes a conversation faster than a prolonged defense. I was overwhelmed, she said. I handled it badly. I should have called you personally. Of course, I said. I understand. Marcus visibly relaxed. I ordered a glass of the house red, something I almost never do. Denise had said, "Have something in your hand. It gives you something to do when you need a second." After the main courses were cleared and the table was quiet, Marcus cleared his throat. "Mom, about the Lincoln Park place. We talked to the developer, and they said the contract can be reinstated. There'd be a small penalty fee, nothing major. And we wanted you to know that we really are grateful. What you were doing for us, that's not something we take for granted." Cassandra nodded. She had her hands folded on the table, and her expression was warm in the way that surfaces that have been prepared look warm. "I've thought about it," I said. They both looked at me. "And I want to help you get the house." Marcus let out a breath. Cassandra's composure softened by a few degrees, just enough to tell me the relief was real. "Mom, we don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "Family is family." I reached into my bag and placed a black folder on the table. "Power." "I did have my attorney draw up a few documents," I said, "just to formalize things between us. Keep everything clear." Marcus looked at the folder and then looked at me. Something flickered in his expression. Too fast to name. "Mom, that's not necessary. It's family." "I know, but I'm 62 years old, and I've learned that clear paperwork is an act of love." I smiled. "It protects all of us. Just read through and sign where it's marked, and then Monday morning we'll call Gerald and schedule the wire." Cassandra reached for the folder first. She opened it and scanned the first page with the practiced speed of someone who reads contracts regularly. Marcus read more slowly, moving his lips slightly the way he always has. I watched him. I kept my face easy and still. "Everything looks fine," he said after a few minutes. He reached for the pen I had placed beside the folder. "Take your time," I said. "There are some clauses near the end about what happens if the terms are altered." "Mom, I trust you." He picked up the pen. Those words, "I trust you," landed somewhere under my sternum and stayed there. I held my expression steady. He signed. All 3 copies. He handed the pen to Cassandra. She hesitated for a moment. Her eyes moved to the bottom of the page, then back to me, then down again. Something in her stilled. Then she signed. I collected the copies carefully and placed them in the black folder. I put the black folder in my bag. Then I reached back into my bag and placed a red folder on the table. Cassandra's hand moved, a small, involuntary motion, just her fingers tightening slightly where they rested on the tablecloth. "Now," I said, "let's talk about what you actually just signed." I opened the red folder and spread the contents across the table between us. The forged transfer slips, the bank statements with the highlighted withdrawals. Patricia Okafor's documentation from the Fraud and Compliance Review. 4 pages of handwriting analysis comparing the forged signatures to my actual signature on file. And then the 3 documents from the black folder, what they had just signed, with Calvin's annotations in the margins. I let them look. Marcus stared at the bank statements. His color changed in a way I had only seen once before, when he was 14, and I found the report card he had tried to hide from me. Cassandra was very still. Her eyes moved across the documents with a focus that confirmed what I had already understood. She was not surprised by the substance of what she was seeing. She was surprised that I had it. "The first document you just signed," I said, "is a statement from you, Marcus, acknowledging the forgeries, that you created them, that you used them to withdraw funds from my account over a period of approximately 4 years, and that the total amount transferred was $94,320. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. "The second document is from you, Cassandra, acknowledging that you received those funds into the business account for Preston and Cass Design Group, that you were aware of their origin, and that you used them to fund the business." Cassandra said, That's not what I signed. Read the third paragraph, I said. She didn't move. The third document is a business transfer agreement. Effective immediately, full ownership of Preston and Cass Design Group transfers to me. The table was quiet. Around us, the restaurant moved on. Low music, the clink of glasses, a burst of laughter from the bar. None of it touched our table. Marcus said, "Mom, you can't do this." "I didn't do this," I said. "You did this 4 years ago. I'm just the one who found out." His voice dropped. "This isn't you." I looked at him. I took my time. I wanted to make sure I meant what I was about to say before I said it. "It's exactly me," I said. "You just never paid close enough attention." I placed money on the table for my portion of the dinner. I stood up, picked up both folders, and looked at them one more time. You have 2 choices. You can honor what you just signed, complete restitution on a schedule my attorney will provide, full transfer of the business, and we handle this privately. Or I walk out of here tonight, and Monday morning I give Gerald the authorization to file the fraud report, and you deal with law enforcement. I paused. You have 24 hours. Marcus stood up. "Mom, I'll see myself out," I said. I walked across the restaurant and through the front door without looking back. Outside on Randolph Street, the air was cold and clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, listening to the city. Then Marcus came through the door behind me. "Mom?" He caught up to me at the edge of the building. His voice was low and urgent. "The business transfer, it won't hold. Cass has a co-signer on the LLC, a silent partner. The documents you had drawn up don't account for that. The transfer can't be executed without their signature." I looked at him. He was telling me this not to help me. He was telling me this to buy time, to find an angle. But I made myself stay very still and simply listen. Then I said, "Good night, Marcus." I walked to my car and drove home. I called Calvin from my driveway. I told him what Marcus had said about the LLC cosigner. I kept my voice level. Calvin asked me to hold on. I heard him typing. He called me back 40 minutes later. "I found the LLC registration," he said. "The silent cosigner is listed as an entity called RMC Capital Holdings." A pause. "Mrs. Chambers, RMC Capital Holdings, is registered to a Raymond Marcus Chambers II. I sat in the quiet of my car. "That's Marcus," I said. "That's Marcus," Calvin confirmed. "He registered a holding company in his name 2 years after the business launched and listed himself as a silent stakeholder. He structured it specifically to limit his visible liability while maintaining ownership interest in the event the marriage ended." I turned that over. Marcus had not simply been complicit in Cassandra's theft of my money. He had built himself an ownership stake in the business funded by that theft. He had been protecting himself. From everything. From Cassandra, from failure, from any version of the future where he needed something to fall back on. He had not been a man who went along with his wife's scheme. He had been a man who saw it clearly enough to structure his own exit from it. "Does this change our position?" I asked. "It strengthens it significantly," Calvin said. "He can't claim the transfer is invalid because of a co-signer he is. The business transfer document is valid. More than that, his personal civil liability is now direct. He's not just a witness to fraud, he's a beneficiary of it. What do? We send them a revised notice tonight with a 48-hour deadline. We attach the LLC documentation, and we make clear that his involvement is now fully documented." "Yes," I said. "Do that." I went inside. I heated up the chicken and rice that had been in my refrigerator since Denise brought it over. I ate at the kitchen table in the quiet. Then I went to bed. The text came in at 6:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because my phone was on the nightstand, and when it lit up, I was already mostly awake, lying in the gray pre-dawn with my eyes open the way I have been since Raymond died. That particular kind of awake, where you're not sure if you slept or if you just moved through the dark in a kind of thinking restreet. The message was from Marcus. 4 words. We'll do it. Please. No explanation, no negotiation, no call. Just those 4 words, and then the message was sitting there on my screen. Small and final. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. I looked at the ceiling. There was a water stain near the light fixture in the corner. A pale brown ring the size of a dinner plate that had been there since a pipe dripped 3 winters ago. Raymond had said he'd repaint that corner. He'd said it several times. He never got around to it. After he died, I told myself I would do it. I never got around to it either. Some things you leave alone, not because you forget them, but because they have become a kind of company. Okay, Raymond, I said, out loud, to the water stain and the quiet room and whatever is left of a person after they are gone. I heard you. I lay there for a few more minutes. Then I got up, made coffee, and called Calvin. Whirr. The notarization was completed on a Tuesday morning in a building downtown that smells like heated air and official business. Cassandra came alone. She wore black, all black, head to foot, which I noticed but didn't remark on. She sat across the table from me and the notary and Calvin, and she did not look at me once during the signing. Her hand was steady. I'll give her that. When it was done, she stood up and put her coat on and left without speaking. Calvin and I sat with the documents for a moment. It's done, he said. I nodded. The firm was mine. The assets, the client relationships, the office lease, the portfolio, all of it. $94,000 of stolen money transformed over 4 years into a going business. Mine now, legally and completely. I sat with that for a day before I did anything. Then I went to the office. The receptionist, her name was Imani, I had learned that from the website, was at her desk when I came in. She looked up with a careful expression, the kind of face a person makes when they are waiting to find out whether they still have a job. Good morning, I said. I'm Lorraine Chambers. I'm the new owner. Yes, ma'am, I know. Are you planning to stay? She looked at me directly. That depends on what you're planning to do with the place. I liked her immediately. I asked her to come sit with me in the conference room, and I asked her to tell me honestly what she thought the firm was doing well and what it was doing to no real purpose. She was 26 years old, and she had graduated from the architecture program at Illinois Institute of Technology, and she had taken this job because the market was difficult, and the hours were manageable, and the work was at least interesting, even if it was not the work she would have chosen. What would you have chosen? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, deciding whether to answer honestly. Then she said, I grew up on the South Side. My grandmother lived in Englewood her whole life. I watched the block change around her, watched good buildings get neglected and then demolished and replaced with nothing useful for the people who were actually living there. She paused. I got into architecture because I wanted to know how to do it differently, how to design spaces that actually serve a neighborhood instead of just replacing it. I sat across from her, and I thought about the portfolio on the walls, the Calicut marble, the rooftop terrace, the Life magazine kitchens. That's not what this firm has been doing, I said. No, she said, it hasn't. What if it started? She was very still for a moment. Then she said, What do you mean? I mean, we keep the commercial clients. That's the revenue that makes everything else possible. But we shift the firm's mission. Accessible residential design, affordable housing consulting, workforce development, training programs for young people who can't get into the field because they don't have the right connections. I looked at her. Could you build something like that? Imani looked at me for a long moment with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to be asked exactly that question. Yes, she said. I could. I know a few people who would come with me if the vision was real. It's real, I said. We shook hands across the conference table. The firm had a new direction. Now it needed a new name. After some thought and one long conversation with Denise over sweet potato pie, I chose New Ground Design. Simple, accurate. Something I could say out loud without feeling like I was performing. 6 months after that meeting in the conference room, New Ground Design held a public launch at the office, which Amani and her team had quietly transformed in the months between. The walls that had held portfolio photos of luxury interiors now showed something different. Renderings of a redesigned community rec center in Auburn Gresham, a proposed affordable housing development in Pilsen, a youth design workshop where middle schoolers from the South Side had spent 4 Saturdays drafting plans for what they wished their neighborhoods looked like. The food was catered by a culinary training program for young adults coming out of the juvenile system. The invitations had gone out to community development organizations, city housing officials, and a few journalists who covered neighborhood infrastructure and policy. I wore the burgundy dress again. Same earrings. The room filled in a way I had not expected. 50 people, then 70, then closer to 100. Imani moved through the space with the natural ease of someone who has been waiting her whole professional life to be in charge of a room like this. The 2 architects she had brought with her, a woman named Deja and a man named Terrence, both in their early 30s, both with the particular energy of people doing work they believe in, were deep in conversation in separate corners with people who looked interested. I was talking to a woman from the city's Department of Housing Development when I looked up and saw Marcus come through the door. He was alone. He was wearing a plain, dark jacket I had never seen before. Nothing like the business casual polish he had worn during the Cassandra years. He looked thinner. He looked older in a way that was not about age. He scanned the room the way he always does in a new space. When his eyes found me, he stopped. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I gave him a small nod. He nodded back. He did not come over. He moved to the edge of the room and stood there with a glass of water, watching. I watched him watching. At some point, he looked at the rendering of the Auburn Gresham Rec Center for a long time. I could not read his face from where I was standing. At 8 o'clock, a journalist from a neighborhood publication asked to speak with me on record. We stood near the window with the city dark outside. She asked what inspired the firm's new direction. I said, I came into this business under circumstances I won't fully describe. But when I looked at what it had been doing and what it could be doing, the choice seemed obvious. There are enough firms in the city designing beautiful spaces for people who already have everything. I wanted to build something for everyone else. She asked if the change had been difficult. I thought about it honestly. The change itself was easy, I said. What was hard was getting to the point where I was willing to make it. That took longer. When the event began to wind down, I looked for Marcus. He was already gone. Go. 3 months after the launch, New Ground Design had 2 active community projects: the Auburn Gresham Rec Center redesign and a consulting contract with a nonprofit developing senior housing in Roseland. And Imani had just been asked to present at a city planning conference in the spring. The repayment schedule Marcus had agreed to was current. Every month, on the 1st, the transfer arrived. No messages attached. No explanations. Just the money. On time. Doing what it was supposed to do. Cassandra had relocated. I heard through someone who knew someone that she was in Atlanta, working for a larger design firm. Starting over, in the way that people who have burned one life down sometimes manage to do with the next one. Calvin and I had dinner twice in the past 2 months. The second time we stayed at the restaurant until they started putting chairs on tables around us, and neither of us mentioned it until the 3rd chair went up and we both laughed. He walked me to my car. He said, I'll call you. He did the next morning. I am 62 years old, and I did not know that a thing like this was still available to me. I am choosing not to define it too quickly. It's the first time in a long time I have let something unfold at its own pace without needing to know in advance what it is. On a Sunday morning in February, I was sitting on my back porch with a cup of coffee. It was cold enough that I had my coat on, but I'd wanted to be outside. The yard was brown and dormant. The garden I keep telling myself I'm going to replant. The fence Raymond built the summer before we found out he was sick. I'd been meaning to restain that fence for 4 years. My phone buzzed on the porch railing. A text from Marcus. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom. I know it's not until May. I've been thinking about it. I know I don't have any right to say that, but I wanted to." I held the phone and read it twice. I thought about the kitchen table, the bills spread out, the boy standing behind me at 16 saying, "When I make it, you won't have to do that anymore." I thought about believing him so completely, and about what it cost me to believe that, and about what I had done with that cost when it finally came due. I thought about the water stain on my bedroom ceiling. Some things you leave because they have become a kind of company. Some things you leave because you haven't decided yet what to do with them. Some things you leave, and then one day you wake up and you simply paint them over. Not because you have forgotten, but because you have made peace. And peace, it turns out, is not the absence of the damage. It's just deciding that the damage doesn't get to be the whole ceiling. I typed back, "Thank you, Marcus." Just that. I set the phone on the railing and picked up my coffee. The yard was quiet. Somewhere down the block, someone was running a snowblower, even though there was barely an inch on the ground. A cardinal landed on the fence post at the back, Raymond's fence, the one I haven't touched, and sat there for a long moment, bright red against all that brown and gray. I watched it until it left. Then I went inside and started my Sunday. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.